The recent debacle at the White House between Trump and Zelensky and JD Vance, still hot off the press. But is it even about the war anymore, or do people just want Ukraine's resources at this point? That's what this video wants to talk about. Says, even US shocked by EU surprise Ukraine deal by the military show. Let's hear it.
There's a new war brewing in Ukraine, this time between the EU and the US.
There you go.
This fight has less to do with Russian President Vladimir Putin and his special military operation, and instead comes down to something that Ukraine has and the rest of the world wants: critical minerals. The US is already negotiating a deal with Ukraine for those minerals. Now Europe has come storming into the fight with a deal of its own. But what do those deals offer Ukraine? Who's going to win between the US and Europe? And why do Ukrainian minerals matter so much in the first place? On February 24th, news started circulating that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump were negotiating. They weren't talking about ways to end the Ukraine war. Rather, the subject of discussions focused on Ukraine's vast reserves of critical
Hey, look, he has a suit on now.
minerals. Trump wants those minerals badly. The BBC reported that Ukraine and the US were already close to signing a deal that would see the US gain enormous access to Ukraine's mineral deposits. Negotiations have been very constructive, wrote Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Olga Stefanishina, in an ex-post. Nearly all key details are finalized. Stefanishina added that Ukraine was committed to proceeding to the signature stage as quickly as possible. The news came amidst Ukraine facing growing pressure from the United States. Trump has been surprisingly vocal in his criticism of Zelensky in recent weeks. He's labeled Ukraine's leader as a dictator, and even insinuated that Ukraine started the war with Russia. However, these claims by America's president may have been a smokescreen. Perhaps Trump was both pulling the wool over Putin's eyes and using his growing relationship with Russia's president to push Ukraine into giving him what he wants. It looks like the ploy worked. However, talk about Ukraine's critical mineral deposits isn't anything new. When Zelensky met Trump in September 2024, while the latter was still on the campaign trail, he presented a Ukrainian victory plan. Rumors at the time suggested this plan contained an agreement to provide the US with access to Ukraine's minerals. This represented Zelensky playing the political game. By offering Trump something he knew the future US president wanted, he gave Trump a tangible reason to continue supporting Ukraine in its war with Russia. After all, the US wouldn't get any of the minerals if Putin's forces overcame Ukraine's defenses. All seemed to be on track with the deal, but there was a problem. When negotiations started, Trump told Zelensky that the US wanted a 50% share of all Ukraine's rare earth minerals.
That's a lot.
According to Trump, that would reflect the amount of aid the US has provided to Ukraine over the last 3 years of its war with Russia. America's president claims that the US military and economic aid to Ukraine totals $500 billion. Zelensky believes otherwise. He says that American assistance so far totals around $100 billion, while also pointing out that the aid Ukraine has received so far was a grant, not a form of credit. Ukraine has no obligation to repay the US for that aid. The Kiel Institute for the World Economy's support tracker places the actual figure somewhere in the middle, though far closer to Zelensky's estimate. It says that the US has provided Ukraine with $119.79 billion so far, with a few billion more yet to be allocated. Regardless of who was right, the deal asked too much of Ukraine. Zelensky outright refused. "I can't sell our state," Ukraine's president replied, which prompted a redrafting of the deal.
I'm going to be a conspiracy theorist here and tell you, now that the US is just not getting its way with the 50% of the resources, would it be so far-fetched to think that he might have made a deal, or Trump in this case might have made a deal with Putin to say that, hey, I'm going to withdraw all my aid. Once you get your way there, then I can have X amount percentage of the resources as well. You might think I'm an idiot, which I am, but is it so far-fetched to think that they're just playing whatever access they can get? Think about it.
Redraft was even worse for Ukraine. Zelensky told reporters that the new draft called for the US to have full
It would explain why there's a complete agenda shift in the Oval Office or in the White House that other day, right? Where it's just like, literally yelling at Zelensky, or JD Vance yelling at Zelensky. Like, it just got really weird. And you would try to understand, like, wow, what happened so quickly that this was the case? Was it just because they want to stop foreign aid, or because the foreign aid isn't getting what they want anymore? And then they'd rather take another deal where they can get what they want. It's never that simple of just, we don't want to spend money there. If that's the case, then why do they send all this money to Israel? Gotta ask, I mean.
Control over Ukraine's minerals. It also didn't contain the security guarantees that Zelensky wanted to see from the US. I will not sign what 10 generations of Ukrainians will have to pay back, Zelensky said in a press conference after receiving the Sunday draft. International opinions about the American deal are divided. Former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson supports it. He claimed on February
At least he has hair, right?
24th that access to Ukraine's minerals was a great prize, while rejecting calls claiming that America's tabled proposals were a rip-off. What the Ukrainians get from this is the United States' commitment under Donald Trump to a free, sovereign and secure Ukraine, claimed Johnson. Other commentators disagreed, with some describing the proposed deal as colonial, a way for the US to take control of Ukraine without actually invading the country. Again, the truth is likely somewhere in the middle, but most seem to agree that the proposed US deal wasn't mutually beneficial and the EU has decided it's time to act. As all of this political wrangling has been going on, Europe was paying very close attention. The continent has its own concerns over America's maverick president. It worries that the US will strong-arm Ukraine to get the deal it wants by threatening to withdraw aid from Zelensky's brave forces. There are also ongoing concerns about what all of that would mean for NATO, with the possibility that Trump might pull the US out of the collective defense organization still looming. So Europe came up with a plan. Rather than allow the US to sign a critical minerals deal with Ukraine, the continent would offer one of its own. This deal would give Ukraine more control over its precious resources while being beneficial to the entire continent. That deal has now been offered. At least that's according to Politico, which reported on the European Union's or EU's supposed offer to Ukraine on February 25th. It said that Europe had offered a new deal to Ukraine, just as Trump was claiming that the US was close to inking a deal with Zelensky. The pitch was made by Stéphanie Séjourné, who is the European Commissioner for Industrial Strategy, during a visit to Kyiv that marked the third anniversary of Putin's invasion of the country. 21 of the 30 critical minerals Europe needs can be provided by Ukraine in a win-win partnership, Séjourné claimed, when speaking to Agence France Presse. The added value Europe offers is that we will never demand a deal that's not mutually beneficial.
This is the funny thing now, right? It's not even funny, it's quite depressing. But the whole thing is just who can offer the best package for Ukraine to accept. It's crazy. It's got nothing to do with the war anymore. It's basically, hey, we'll be here if you give us the best deal, or the other way around, or whatever, right? Europe must be a pain in the ass for Trump right now, I can only imagine.
Added the commissioner. That sounds a lot more like what Zelensky wants out of the deal. With Europe, he'd hand over less control of Ukraine's rare mineral resources while maintaining a multi-country security partner. It sounds like an easy choice, right? But there's another twist to the tale. Even as Séjourné claimed that he'd offered a new deal to Ukraine, the European Commission denied that such a proposal existed. On February 25th, the Kyiv Independent published a report in which it quoted European Commission spokesperson Thomas Reinier. "There is no proposal," Reinier told the outlet, adding that the EU already has a deal with Ukraine relating to critical raw minerals that was formalized in 2021 via the Memorandum of Understanding. In other words, the EU deal already exists. This dates back 4 years, added Reinier. This cooperation is not only about securing supply chains for the EU, but also about fostering local value creation and capacity building in partner countries, ensuring mutual benefits. Reinier also added that Séjourné's comments weren't meant to imply that Europe was competing with the US on a deal. This is really here about cooperation with Ukraine and not about any sort of competition with the US, added the spokesperson. Reinier noted that Séjourné was simply reinforcing the EU's intention to work alongside Ukraine per the agreements made via the Memorandum of Mutual Understanding. Feels a little murky. One minute, we seem to be seeing the US and EU lining up to fight over who gets control over Ukraine's vast mineral assets. The next minute, the EU is pulling out of that fight, claiming that any deal being mentioned in reports is just a deal that the EU signed back in 2021. Soon that murkiness may clear away. After all, it looks like the US has gotten what it wants. In the early hours of February 26th, Ukraine claimed that it had agreed to terms with the US on the crucial minerals deal. No confirmation has come from the office of President Trump as of the writing of this video, likely due to the time difference between Ukraine and the US. However, the agreed-upon deal seems more favorable to Ukraine than the one Trump presented to Zelensky on February 23rd. Sky News reports that the new American deal no longer contains an initial demand from the US for $500 billion of the potential revenue generated by Ukraine's resources. That appears to be a major backpedal for Trump. Whether he still feels Ukraine owes the US $500 billion doesn't matter. If Ukraine is to be believed, the US won't be receiving that money via the minerals deal. However, Ukraine doesn't get all its own way in the revised agreement. The latest draft doesn't include a commitment from the US to provide security guarantees to Ukraine should a ceasefire between it and Russia be negotiated. That's something Ukraine desperately needs. It doesn't want to find itself coming under Russian attack again once it starts rebuilding during a ceasefire. Still, the deal is a massive step forward for Zelensky's relationship with Trump. Once signed, it'll start a new long-term partnership between the two that sees the US get what it wants, which will keep Trump happy. The lack of security guarantees is a concern for Ukraine. However, it may be assumed that the US will step in should Putin attack again after a ceasefire, if not to protect Ukraine, then to ensure the money generated from the country's minerals keeps on flowing. But what minerals does Ukraine have? And why are they so important that they've almost sparked a brief negotiation war between the US and EU? As Sojourner said on February 25th, Ukraine is home to 21 of the 30 rare earth minerals that the EU classifies as critical raw materials.
Damn.
Its reserves of these minerals are vast. The United Nations Regional Information Center for Western Europe says that Ukraine is home to 5% of the world's reserves of these minerals.
What an important place, huh? Imagine being Putin right now, thinking like these superpowers are just battling over this country, and he's just continuing his thing. You got to give him for his resolve, right? He basically said, "Look, this is the thing, this is the case, and now I'm doing it because I'm being pushed to the brink or the edge." And he hasn't changed his stance this whole time. I don't know, and then just breeding chaos in the other people. The other countries like the US and many countries in Europe as well.
Which includes the likes of lithium, graphite, niobium, and cobalt. Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources, Svetlana Grinchuk, pointed this out in 2022 while speaking at the UN Economic Commission for Europe. She said Ukraine is home to 5% of the rare earth mineral reserves, despite the country only accounting for 0.4% of the Earth's surface.
That's a lot.
In other words, Ukraine is a treasure chest of precious materials. It's just waiting for allies to help it unlock the chest. Lithium is the headline mineral of the bunch. The mineral is an essential ingredient in rechargeable batteries, which are used in everything from smartphones and laptops to electric cars and weaponry. Ukraine has a lot of it, about 500,000 tons, according to the National Academy of Sciences in Ukraine. The problem is that two of the country's key mining sites, Shevchenkivsky in Donetsk and Kruta Balka in Zaporizhia, are currently located in conflict zones. Russia is actively fighting Ukraine in territories where its rare earth minerals are found. That's no coincidence. Behind all of Putin's rhetoric about wanting to reclaim Ukraine as part of Russia, there's a clear desire to get his hands on the country's valuable resources. That's one of the reasons why he spent so much of 2024 and into 2025 pushing for Donetsk. Putin hopes that claiming the territory will give him access to a steady supply of lithium. And it's even better if a peace plan with Ukraine allows Russia to keep the territory it's captured so far. Russia would gain full control over the resources in Donetsk. Right now, Moscow is believed to control around 40...
I want to show you something, and this is from RFK, right? He explains some of the situation in Ukraine. Just have a listen to this.
This is a war that should have never happened. It's a war the Russians tried repeatedly to settle on terms that were very, very beneficial to Ukraine and us. The major thing they wanted was for us to keep NATO out of the Ukraine. The big military contractors want to add new countries to NATO all the time. Why? Because then that country has to conform its military purchases to NATO weapon specifications, which means certain companies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed, get a trapped market. In March of 2022, we committed $113 billion. Just to give you an example, we could have built a home for almost every homeless person in this country. We then committed another $24 billion since then, 2 months ago, and now President Biden is asking for another $60 billion. But the big expenses are going to come after the war. when we have to rebuild all the things that we destroyed. Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to spend $113 billion to Ukraine? He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
So he just admitted it's a money laundering scheme. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, said, don't worry, it's not a gift to Ukraine, it's a loan. So raise your hand if you think that that loan's ever getting paid back. Yeah, of course it's not. So why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on? Number one, an extreme austerity program, so that if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to be poor forever. Number two, most important, Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets up for sale to multinational corporations, including all of its agricultural land, the biggest single asset in Europe. In Ukraine, there's been 1,000 years of war fought over that land. It's the richest farmland in the world. It's the breadbasket of Europe. 500,000 kids almost, Ukrainian kids, have died to keep that land as part of Ukraine. They almost certainly didn't know about this loan condition. They've already sold 30% of it. The buyers were DuPont, Cargill, and Monsanto. Who do you think owns all of those companies? Yeah, BlackRock.
See, I don't know. I haven't checked the accuracy of any of this, but getting companies like those companies to manage the wheat fields, perhaps, or the agricultural land of Ukraine, it's just, I don't like seeing that. The other thing is also, my stance has always been, well, look, Putin didn't want NATO expanding eastward, so we're in this massive mess. Was he going to do it anyways to get resources? Who the heck knows what might have happened, right? Who the heck knows? But here we go, a video that's just like, look, you got to think more about the bigger picture. Who's starting to own everything? Who has vested interest in this war continuing or whatever? And you have all these defense manufacturers or defense contractors, that have a vested interest in the fact that this goes in a certain way. Sometimes it's just, you can start thinking, okay, this is very conspiratorial, but it always is. And in the end, it's always proven to be right. And we forget, like amongst all these games, many, many, many people are dying. And many people will remain in poverty for a long, long time. It's sometimes just looking at it from a humanitarian perspective, although it can feel a bit utopian, makes you wonder, puts your perspective like correctly, I guess. This is disgusting. If you look at it, it's just disgusting. If you were looking at this from a game perspective, like a bird's eye view, it's some video game you're playing, you're going to think, yo, this is crazy. But nah, this is the real world.
And then in December, President Biden gave out the contract to rebuild Ukraine.
There you go.
And who do you think got that contract? BlackRock. So they're doing this right in front of us. They don't even care that we know anymore, because they know that they can get away with it. And how do they know that? Because they have a strategy. And that strategy is an old strategy, which is they keep us at war with each other. They keep us hating on each other. They keep the Republicans and Democrats fighting each other, black against white, and all these divisions that they sow.
This was at a time when RFK was saying a bunch of good stuff. Now all he talks about is, he's a Secretary of Health now, right? Now he's talking about how anti-Semitism is bad against health. Like, whatever, man. Let's go back to this.
Percent of Ukraine.
Oh, by the way, the whole loan condition thing he was speaking about, which is really important. Imagine now if Ukraine is like, look, we don't actually owe you that money because it was given to us in good faith, right? Imagine how angry the U.S. must be if the U.S. had this whole idea that this was a loan condition and they were going to get a bunch of things or the money in return somehow. You can imagine that even on the highest levels, miscommunication is sowing all this disagreement and hatred and shifting of sides and players. while what they tell you through public relations is a completely different thing.
Metallic minerals. Russia also occupies territory containing 63% of Ukraine's coal mines, along with half of its cesium, tantalum, manganese, and rare earth deposits. According to Ukraine's economy minister, Yulia Sviridenko, those resources are worth about $350 billion alone. Seizing those assets is key to Putin's war strategy because it allows him to cut off a key source of income to Ukraine. Before Putin launched his February 2022 invasion, Ukraine's minerals accounted for 6.1% of its gross domestic product and 30% of its exports. And there are other minerals besides lithium to which Europe and the US wants access. For instance, Ukraine provided 7% of the titanium used around the world in 2019. That rare metal is used for building planes and nuclear power plants. It was also responsible for 20% of the world's graphite before Russia invaded, which is another material used in nuclear power plants along with electric vehicles. Ukraine is also perfectly positioned to meet rising global demand, according to the UN. It says that demand for copper is expected to increase by 40% over the next few decades, with demand for lithium rising by 90% during the same period. There's also demand on the environmental front. The International Energy Agency says that meeting global net zero carbon emissions by 2030 requires the opening of 50 new lithium mines, along with 17 cobalt and 60 nickel mines. Again, Ukraine is home to all of these materials, which could make it a crucial contributor to combating global climate change. All of this brings us to the question of why Ukraine's mineral resources are so important to the US and the EU. We've just touched on one of the answers. Ukraine's rare mineral reserves are going to become increasingly vital in the coming years. Not that they aren't already. Global demand for lithium and copper is already massive. But as more countries move toward renewable energy technologies, demand will only grow. Think about what that means from a profit perspective. On the lithium front, a single ton of this material costs $10,452.30 as of February 25th. Multiply that by 500,000, which is the number of tons Ukraine has in its reserves, and you get $5.226 billion. And that's a low-end price. In December 2022, per-ton prices for lithium were around $80,000. That would have made Ukraine's reserves worth a massive $40 billion. The price of this material may rise again given the world's increasing use of lithium in electric products. As other reserves run dry, Ukraine's lithium could be a massive money spinner for Europe and the US. Dr. Robert Mugger, who's the principal of SecDev, expands on this. He points out that critical minerals are the foundation of the 21st century economy. They are crucial in renewable energy, as already mentioned, but also offer expansive military and industrial infrastructure applications. Mugger claims that minerals are playing a growing strategic role in geopolitics and geoeconomics. With that growing role will come more potential for profit, which is great for Ukraine. But it's also great for Trump because it means he gets to claim a big win in clawing back the money he believes Ukraine owes the US. However, future profit may not be the main reason that Trump wants Ukraine's minerals so badly. There's another factor at play here: China. Right now, China is one of the dominant powers in critical mineral refining capacity. The Guardian says Beijing handles refining for about 35% of the world's nickel, along with up to 70% of its lithium and cobalt. It's also the biggest player when it comes to rare earth elements, or REEs. China accounted for nearly half of the world's supply of REEs in 2024 and handled almost 90% of its refining of these precious materials. Now think about what Donald Trump has done to China since he became president. He's instigated a trade war with China using his tariffs. Trump's 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports took effect on February 4th. Trump also claims that he's going to impose a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports into the US, which will include China's metals. This has already triggered a response from Beijing. China is taking a tit-for-tat approach by implementing tariffs of its own. It now has a 15% border tax that applies to all imports of US liquefied natural gas and coal products, along with a 10% tariff on large engine cars, crude oil, and agricultural machinery. China also imposed a ban on rare mineral exports to the US in December 2024. That ongoing trade battle is evolving into a major problem for the US on the critical minerals front. With China being so deeply entrenched in that sector, the US has to look for alternatives to keep supplies of these minerals flowing into the country.
I think it's crazy because the US has historically been on the military front using that power to gain access to certain things, right? But it's seemingly becoming more and more difficult considering Russia's now engaged in something and the US is in major debt. And here you have China just playing the trade war the entire time. And they have a lot of cards in their hands. And the US is now finding that, like, what do we do here? It's a difficult game to play against China because all the manufacturing is on their end. They got tariffs in place and everything. It's an interesting change of perspective here. I mean, I wonder what the US will end up becoming. Or will it change its strategies? Maybe that's what it's trying to do. I don't know.
Trump's deal with Ukraine is his get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to the mineral issue. The EU likely sees a similar threat related to China controlling so much of the world's critical mineral reserves, which is why it struck its own deal with Ukraine back in 2021. China has been on Trump's mind ever since he took office, according to a February 25th article by The Conversation. It points out that China also controls a large portion of the world's gallium reserves, which is key to many of America's most modern defense technologies. Ukraine is the world's 5th largest gallium producer, meaning Trump has been eyeing up his minerals deal for a long time because he knows Ukraine can replace the lost flow of Chinese gallium. Trump is also wary of Putin's close relationship with China, especially given that China has become the dominant force in that twosome, according to The Conversation. Beijing's increasing influence needs to be countered, at least in Trump's mind. The minerals deal with Ukraine is a way to take power away from China. If Ukraine can offer the minerals that China no longer provides to the US, Trump proves to Beijing that the world doesn't need China as much as Beijing thinks it does. Zelensky is keen on critical mineral deals, whether with the US or the EU, because those deals can reopen a valuable part of his country's economy. And even when those deals don't include security guarantees, as is the case with the US deal, they're still valuable. Each deal makes the West more reliant on Ukraine's most valuable resources at a time when China is cutting the West off from those resources. The US and EU will want to hold on to that value, meaning they may provide Ukraine with security and greater access to its own minerals, even if neither provides any guarantees. Perhaps Zelensky has conducted the biggest masterstroke in these deals. Security is implied, if not guaranteed. The deal Ukraine struck with the EU in 2021, and that is now being touted again, strengthens Ukraine's ties with its European partners. As for Ukraine's new deal with the US, it may just represent the olive branch Zelensky needs to lure America's president back to his side after several weeks of Trump seeming to favor Putin. And best of all, striking those deals also means that Putin will face direct opposition from the US and EU if he tries to claim the mineral resources in that territory that Russia currently occupies. But what do you think about Europe and America's mineral deals with Ukraine? Will they have an impact on the war? Has Zelensky used these deals to curry favor with the US at a time when American support seemed shaky? Let us know what you think in the comments, and remember to subscribe to the channel for the latest news about the Ukraine war. At a time when American support seemed shaky. Let us know what you think in the comments, and remember to subscribe to the channel for the latest news about the Ukraine war.
Channel. This is, it makes you understand the geographic location of Ukraine and what it harbors in terms of resources or agricultural land. Makes you understand why there's so much fuss about Ukraine for so long. Let me just check it. How many wars are currently happening? Just like that. 56 conflicts. There's a lot. And it's just like, okay, why is this one so important for the EU and the US? There's probably more than 56, I don't even know. Anyways, war is about old guys who know each other, fought by young guys who don't know each other. All wars are fought for power and money. Suffering of the people doesn't matter to those in power. Well, it's true. War never changes. It's all about greed and something someone has, and you want it. You want it. These critical minerals are available in the United States, Canada, Africa, Australia. We're not even sure the minerals are accessible in Ukraine. Just because you have them doesn't mean you can get them out of the ground economically. There is no situation that cannot be made worse by the intervention of politicians. Trump didn't insinuate that Ukraine started the war. He actually said that. Yeah, I don't know. All those poor young and old souls that were lost over land and minerals. What a shame. Fascinating. This brings the conflict into new light. I thought I had a grasp of what it was all about, but now I see it's all money and power. Just as so many wars in history have been. It's always the same. Enemies want their territories, allies want their resources. What a time to be a Ukrainian. This is a good one, I think. When USSR was broken up, Ukraine had a large number of nuclear weapons. Both Russia and US signed a document guaranteed Ukraine freedom and independence. So much for paper deals. Good only until one sees something they want. Let's see. Zelensky said it recently. Trump won't be there for many years, while they need peace for decades to come. Any rush deal made with the USA right now is a major problem for the future of Ukraine. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Trump's there for another 4 years now. What's to say it's a bad deal and as soon as the 4 years are over, they're done with someone else, some other president, you know? Look, I hate the whole situation in Ukraine. I don't think the U.S. should be providing foreign aid, and the EU can figure it out between themselves. But that's just because I think the U.S. should concentrate on itself. It's been meddling in things since forever. Should NATO advance eastward? No. Putin has made an entire video stating what he wants and everything, but it's gone so far now that things might have changed. What do you think? What do you think is the solution? We can't have full all-out war, or at least we'd like to avoid that. What do you think is the solution here? What should happen?